Welcome to Sober Talk. I'm Dennis and I'm an alcoholic. Sober today thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you or anyone you know is struggling with alcohol, please call Alcoholics Anonymous on 1300 222222 or visit their website at aa.org.au. I'll just run through the preamble of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problems and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for a membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. It is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses or opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety.
Thanks. My name is Margie. I'm an alcoholic, and I am so thrilled to be back in my hometown of Adelaide. I've moved back here from Byron, and it's just feels like home. So I'm just going to start with a little piece, and it's called The Concept of Oneness. When I think about my 34 years of recovery, and I think about my time before that, the one word that comes into my mind is connection. And the one word that comes into my mind when I think about my recovery today and how I practice is that one word, connection. So this is the concept of oneness. Close your eyes if you like while I read this to you. The idea of the concept of oneness is an ancient concept. It's about unity, oneness. So imagine that the ocean is completely limitless. It's one giant being. Imagine the ocean decides to create clones of itself. It makes beautiful little balls of ice, all made up of the same thing, just frozen into different forms. And these balls forget where they come from, and they see themselves as separate, not the same as the other little frozen balls. It's called duality. And all these different little balls live in this world of duality. And we, as human beings, if I was to melt one of those balls of ice, what would happen? It would melt back into the ocean. So the idea of oneness is that we are all the same, with no separation, no difference, just formed into different forms. And the concept of oneness is important when we're in moments of comparison, which is not good enough, and self-limiting beliefs. And essentially, what we're doing in those moments is seeing ourselves as separate. So if you embrace the idea of oneness, there is no separateness. There is no need to compare, and there is no not good enough. And it's a beautiful way to manage when we identify with our ego, because we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And when in doubt, remember that not good enough or comparison or judging is putting our power outside to other people. When I come back to the idea that I am one, so there is no not good enough, no judging what I'm based on what I see externally to me. There is no comparison. And I judge that I am good enough to be that person, that body, that job. I am the one. I am infinite, because we're all the same. We just put on different costumes. We look, speak, and eat differently. But our purpose is that as spiritual beings, we start to remember who we are. And it's not the getting of it, it's the living it. So in a nutshell, that's my story, from disconnection to connection. There's this lovely little saying that I'll read to you. We each have 86,400 seconds every single day. If we don't use them, we can't save them. My account is cleaned out every night, and I need to start again. So day at a time for me has been my belief in my practice for 34 years. And I have, for anyone who's new, this little saying, sobriety is not a limitation, it's my superpower. And I have this little prayer, dear God, I have a problem, me. Dear child, I have an answer, me. And that, and my story, when I drank like an alcoholic. I drank like an alcoholic woman. I got into all the terrible strife that alcoholic women get in until one day I had this thought, and that thought was, I want to live. And that I want to live became my mantra. And I knew that there was something better. My father was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. I knew what alcoholics were like. And there came a time when it was enough. And this extraordinary thing happened. I was having a party at my place. It was in Norwood. And I invited all these people who I didn't know to come to this party. And I was drunk, as usual. And something happened. I gashed my foot on some broken glass. And two people that I had no idea who they were took me to the hospital. And I remember lying on this doctor's table at the hospital, and he looked at this woman, me, with such loathing and disgust. You know, I had cigarette burns on my jacket. I smelt like I hadn't had a bath for a while. And I still remember his eyes. And I got back into the car with these two people, and I sat in the back seat. And as they were driving me back to my place, these words came to my mind. And that word was, I want to live. And I'd never thought I wanted to live before that. I was destroying every part of my life. And the next morning I woke up and I had heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God I'd heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I rang. I found it really difficult to spell that word alcoholic the next morning when I was looking at it in the phone book. And eventually I did, and this Irish woman answered the phone in the AA office, and her name was Kate, Irish Kate. She said two things to me. She said, Margie, do you think you've got a problem with alcohol? And I said, yeah. And she said, are you willing to go to any length to get well? And I said, yes. And she picked me up. She said, I'll pick you up tonight and I'll take you to a meeting. And I had no idea what sort of meeting she was talking about. But I dressed what I thought was appropriate for an AA meeting with the oldest, daggiest clothes that I could think of. She came in her car and it was filled with Irish people. It was Paddy, Dennis, Kate, and a friend of Paddy's. I can't remember his name. And I thought to myself as they were driving me, I thought, AA must be all about Irish people. And I got to the meeting and she said, sit in intensive care down the front, sat in intensive care. And I heard my story time and time and time again. This was in Norwood. And, I've heard other people say it, and it is so true that you think to yourself, that must have been eavesdropping. They know my story. And thank God, for Kate. Kate was a gorgeous, flamboyant, over-the-top Irish woman with these great scarves that she'd wrap around herself in the meetings. She became my first sponsor, and she was the sweetest, kindest person. But she didn't really know. And she said, when my time to do the steps came along, and I said, Kate, will you take me through the steps? And she just said, no, I haven't done the steps. And I then started looking around and really trying to hear what I needed to hear about the steps. And I found a lot of people, or a few people that said they'd take me through the steps, and they took me through the steps, but I didn't get it. I didn't see the point of it. I didn't hear the God stuff. I didn't understand the God stuff, and I was a bit anti-God anyway. And I remember I went to Sydney, and I went to this great meeting at Bondi, which is on the beach. And I stood up from the front of the meeting and I said, I can't get God. I've been in AA for, I don't know, 6 months or something. And I just can't get God. And this guy said to me, come out in my combi and I'll talk to you. So I went out to the combi, and he took me through We Agnostics. And then in We Agnostics, it tells me how to get from willingness to belief. And, starting off with a willingness, making a decision, coming to believe, and so on. And then he said, now I want you to go out onto the beach, and I want you to walk on the sand. And as you walk on the sand, I want you to think to yourself, could I have created this sand that I'm walking on? And he said, come back and tell me the answer. And I knew then there had to be a power greater than myself. And then I came back to Adelaide full of love, I guess, for the fellowship and for gratitude for what I'd learned. And those who know me from that time will know that I became a bit of I don't know quite how to say it, totally in love with the steps, should I say. And I wanted to be the best sponsor there ever was. I wanted to be the best student there ever was. And I wanted to have the best recovery there ever was. And in those days, which is 34 years ago now, 30 odd years ago, there were these two guys called Joe and Charlie. And in the 1970s, Joe and Charlie one was a black guy and one was a white guy from the States. And in those days, there wasn't a lot of people, really getting together like that. They got together and they studied the big book, and they put together these tapes. And some of you who've been around long enough will remember the Joe and Charlie tapes. So again, being a person that's a little bit full on, I made the decision that I wanted to learn everything there was about the Joe and Charlie tapes. So I took, and in those days had a little tape recorder and the Joe and Charlie tapes, and I took myself off out to the bush, to a little hut for, I think it was 4 days. I took reams of paper, lots of pens and so on. And I sat there and I transcribed every single word from all their tapes. And then when I came back to Adelaide, I put them together in books. And by then I had a few sponsees. And I said to them, from now on, we're going to learn the steps through the Joe and Charlies. And I thought I'd show you these poor people, these poor sponsees of mine. This was one, and that was just steps 10 and 11. So there is one person here tonight who sat through that with all the 12 steps, with all of this. And it was, I learned. That was the thing. That was the only way that I could really learn, was to do it and to teach it. And I've learned today that the best way to learn is to teach, because then you make all the mistakes and then you keep them. So then I remember Broken Hill Jack used to say to me, he'd say, whenever you get upset, go find a sacred ground to sit in. And he said the sacred grounds are where the churches are built. And I used to go and sit in all of these different churches. This began a thing for me where I discovered a love for all types of religion, and again became fanatical about that. But I felt the peace that he was talking about sitting in, and it didn't matter what faith the churches were or the cathedrals were. I could feel the sacred ground below me. Not very long after that, there was this extraordinary thing happening in Melbourne. It happens every 10 years, and it's called the Parliament of World Religions. And over 200, it's every 10 years, over 200 religions, and all the leaders of those religions would come in and they would they would all hold little workshops. All these amazing different faiths would hold all these workshops, which we all free, which we could sit in on and learn. And Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, all different faiths. And that again, it opened my eyes to the beauty of sacred. And I then made a decision that I wanted to learn more. So I started, I went to Dharamsala to do some teachings with His Holiness, and all sorts of places. And I ended up in Hanoi, in Vietnam, and took precepts from Thich Nhat Hanh. And then when I left from that teaching, which was about I think 3 or 4 weeks, I thought I'd become a nun. But he said, "You're too old." All his nuns were in their 20s, just beautiful, beautiful women. But it was extraordinary because by then I'd been studying the Jains, I'd been studying the Quakers, and I went to a Quaker meeting once, and I remember what they said. They said, before you open your mouth, everyone's sitting around in a circle, and they said, before you open your mouth, ask yourself, is it kind? Is it true? Is it necessary? And those 3 things have held me in good stead today when I'm listening to something I may not want to hear or, want to open my mouth and talk about something. I just stop. Is it kind? Is it true? Is it necessary? So when I came back from all these travels, the Toronto World Conference was on, the AA conference in Toronto, and I went over to that, and that's on again this year. I went over to that, and it was extraordinary. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of people, all in AA. And there I met my current sponsor. I've had 3 sponsors in my time in AA. I've had 3 beautiful, extraordinary women. At Kate first, and Polly became my 3rd sponsor. And I am so grateful for the women who've sponsored me. She introduced me to her friend Sandy Beach. Sandy B, I spoke to him before he died. Tragically, I have to tell you how he died because it was so beautiful. He was a really spiritual, extraordinary man. By the time I got to speak to him, he was not well. But he was gentle and just extraordinary. The way he died, he was at a small meeting like this around the table, and they were reading step 1, and he just, from the 12 and 12, and as they were reading step 1, Sandy put his head down onto the book and he died. And my story with Sandy was I would ring him every few weeks. The first thing he said to me was, "Margie, who's with you?" And I said, I was big noting myself, no one. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm writing this and that." And he said, "From now on, you give God the credit for everything you do. You are never alone." And that changed everything. He taught me about forgiveness. He taught me when anything happens to you, I'll give you the example he gave to me. When he had 2 daughters, both died. One was murdered and one died of addiction. And he said when he knew when 2 men came to his door, 2 policemen, I think they were, came to his door, he knew something bad had happened. And he said to himself what his sponsor had said to him. His sponsor said, "No matter what happens, Sandy, you are a forgiving person." And he said, "When I heard the knock on the door and I saw who was there. I said to them, come in, I'll come back to you in a moment. And he said he went to his room, his office, and he prayed. He prayed to God and he said to God, no matter what, I am a forgiving person. No matter what, I will never doubt God. And he said he went out and he heard what had happened to his daughter. And he said, and this always sticks with me, and he said, no matter what, you must have that little gap, that sacred pause before you respond. And he said, in that time, in that little sacred pause is when you bring God in. And how extraordinary was that? He taught me about forgiveness and, he had real, and he was a real human being as well, as a spiritual person. And he said, yes, I had to forgive the person that did this straight away. Otherwise I would never have forgiven him. But he said, as time went on, that forgiveness became harder and harder. And he showed me his humanness in all of this. He wasn't a saint. So, I just think I am so blessed to know people, to have people around me, to have sponsors around me, to come to meetings like this, and just be happy. So my own, sometimes people say, what is your practice? And my practice is, I believe what Sandy told me, that he said, where is God? And he said, the only place you find God is in the now, in this second. And so for me, my practice is always trying to stay present where possible. I have a meditation routine that I love, where I look first at the five senses, where I feel, tasting, hearing, touching, smelling, and so on. And then I do a centering prayer, which is just one single word. And often that word for me that I meditate on and I repeat is the word love. Sometimes it's the word God, sometimes it's the word peace, but it can be any word. And that just brings me back into the present moment. Where do I find God? I find God in all things. This is what I've learned, when that guy who took me, told me to go out in the sand and recognize that I couldn't have made that, I now look at every, flowers. I look at flowers in my garden. I look at trees that are, I walk past, and I recognize the extraordinariness of the privilege of living a human life, and to be able to look at anything in my garden, to look at any tree and recognize I can't remember how many trillion, 6 trillion, I think was, I think there's 200 million or 200,000 leaves on every tree, and there's something like 6 trillion trees in the world. I looked it up once to see how many leaves were in the world, because every leaf is different. Every color of every leaf is different. And sometimes when I'm walking around or, going for walks, and I think to myself, what a privilege, what an honor to know this sort of stuff, to look around and to be a part of life and death. So I find God in all things. I find God, if I look at your eyes, if I look at anybody's eyes, I will see God if I'm in a good space. If I look in the eyes of my grandchildren's dogs, I see God. I see God in all things. And, how extraordinary are we to be part of humanity. So I think that's probably it from me.
AA has more than 2 million recovering alcoholics throughout the world. In Australia, there are about 18,000 members. They meet in over 2,000 local meetings spread around the country. Meetings range in size from a handful in some areas to hundreds or more in larger communities. And once again, if anyone you know is struggling with alcohol issues, please call Alcoholics Anonymous in 1300 222222 or visit their website on aa.org.au.